Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about how to write a reaction paper with a particular look at an assignment in the nursing program that has a little logistical hitch with it. And we'll talk about how to work around that, both in terms of general research and in terms of APA style. More about that in a little bit, but if you're new to the Online Writing Center, we work with students in just about all of ACU's online programs. We're happy to work with you, whether you're coming in with a few notes or ideas for a thesis statement, a partial draft, or complete draft that you're revising, or perhaps a paper that you've gotten feedback on from your instructor and that you are looking to revise and make all that it can be. You can make an appointment by going to my.acu.edu and on the Quick Links menu, selecting Online Writing Center and just following the instructions from there. We work with students through asynchronous appointments where you sign up for a time, send us your paper, and then we'll get back to you generally within 24 hours during the main semester, perhaps a little bit longer if it's a major holiday weekend or during the intersession. And then you can also sign up for real-time phone or Zoom appointments. We've got a large collection of webinars on different topics that are available on the Online Writing Center website, and you can, of course, ask us questions by sending us an email. Something that may interest you as well is that we record all of our webinars, and we have a tabbed and ever-expanding guide here. So if you go to our Writing Webinars page, at the top you'll see a calendar schedule of all the webinars that are coming up this term. But if you scroll down, you'll find this guide where we've sorted it by the program name. So after this recording posts, we'll not only see NURS, DNP, but NURO to include the undergraduate courses in that particular offering. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive into looking at our main learning objectives today. First, we're going to understand this assignment that we're using as a catalyst for discussion, NURO 353's Week 1 assignment, The Importance of Cultural Competency in the Workplace. Second, we're going to be talking about how to access, cite, and reference archived websites, because sometimes you're using materials that are no longer in the place where they once were. A publisher can go out of business, a journal might be absorbed or renamed or rebranded, the website might move, and so we'll talk about that, and then we'll finish with the discussion of outline and drafting, or how to take the instructions and start planning out how you will write your paper, in this case, how you'll be writing this particular genre of papers. So let's take a look at that assignment. So this is coming from the Health Assessment Across the Lifespan course. And if we look at the instructions, we see that they begin with a preamble about the purpose of this assignment. Providing patient care requires nurses to be more aware of the cultural and belief systems of their patients. Good. This assignment provides students with an opportunity to reflect on cultural competency with the workplace. Okay, so part of the exercise is to think about this and to show in writing that you've thought about it. And now we have some advanced instructions to read this article, more on that in a little bit, and then to write a critique of the article in at least 500 words using APA formatting. And let's just go into that length first. So what does 500 words mean? Well, using our APA course paper template, following APA style, meaning you have 12-point font, say Times New Roman, double space, that's going to be about 2 pages of body text, which is to say, not counting the references, not counting the title page, but 2 full pages will be approximately 500 words. And what are the instructions asking you to do? Well, to identify what you agree or disagree with, that's discussed in this article, to describe your current experience, whatever that is, and your informed opinion about cultural competency in your current workplace, whatever that is. Now, I've seen students discuss current workplaces as their most current or most recent, and as well as where they're actively employed, depending on where you are in your studies and your professional arc. And in some cases, they'll be describing as their workplace a place where they're doing clinical rotation, clerkship, etc. So if in doubt, ask your professor, but generally current workplace will be the most recent applicable situation, which may not always be exactly the one that you are working in right now, but one in which you can discuss this more profoundly. All right, the third bullet here is asking, do you have any ideas that you would like to share about increasing cultural competence and implementing it in your current workplace? Okay, so how is this being scored? Well, if we look at the rubric, we see that the large portion of the points, 80%, is going to providing a critique of the article which demonstrates comprehension and critical assessment. And a much smaller 10% is going to discussing or describing your current work experience and your reflections on cultural competency in that workplace. And so we see that the larger portion of those 2 pages, larger by far because 80% is going towards that, it should be that critique of the article. So most of the focus should be on the article, and then perhaps a paragraph or 2 about your current workplace and your reflections and insights there. Now, it's not saying that you only should write 2, but that the minimum should be 2 full pages. And then, the more detailed and direct you are, the more concise you'll be able to do that. But minimum of 500 words. Okay, and it should also have APA formatting, APA required citations, and a reference page, which is a good place for us to talk about this article. Now, by the time you're reading this, it may have changed, but with some assignments, there will be links to external resources. And those links don't always work because websites change, publishers can close, can be bought out, can be consolidated, can be renamed, web URLs can change. Now, for scholarly journal articles, nowadays they're increasingly being assigned something called a DOI, a digital object identifier, that if you type that in, should always take you to wherever that journal article lives now. Not everything has a DOI, and most of the time, things that are published through blogs, as this particular source is, may not. Now, if we run into a broken link, if it's, again, something that's published in a scholarly journal, you might go looking and see where you can find it in a database. Or you might do a Google search. But if you can't find it, but you have a URL for where it used to live, and it's not something that required a password to access, in this case, blogs almost always don't have password control because they want people to read it, then you can try something like archive.org's Wayback Machine. So let's start with the link that, as the time that I am recording this, is not working. That website appears to have closed. But you can go ahead and go to archive.org, which has, among other things, digitized books in a digital library that you can borrow from. But it also hosts something called the Wayback Machine. We're going to look at this in more detail shortly. So the Wayback Machine is a way of looking at how publicly accessible websites looked at certain points in time where it has saved those. And even if the website is not online, usually you can find it archived with the fully accessible or fully readable version and saved. Now, if we're talking about something that is behind a paywall where you need to have a username and a password to access, then no. And if the site creator has requested it not be backed up here, then it won't be. But let's take a look, shall we? So, spoilers, you can find it. But let's go ahead and look at how you would be doing that. We're going to need just one thing, and that is this link for where it used to live. If you know where, you can go ahead and find it from here. So if we load up this, the web browser will give us this error message. Oops, this is not the site you're looking for. This looks like their hosting account has expired. Now you can take that URL here and go to archive.org And you can click on this Wayback Machine box to see more options, or just go ahead and paste the URL here and hit enter. And it tells us, oh, yes, it actually does have 5 different saves of the website. And so we could go ahead and look back here and see, oh, it saved one in 2022. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that, because we don't know when this blog entry was created yet. And we see it was saved on October 31st. So let's go ahead and take a peek at that and see what we see. Now, this looks like we have the website, and we have the web page, and ta-da! We now have access to an archived version of this. Now, as I mentioned earlier, things move all the time, and you can often access an article through the journal website, through perhaps the personal website of whoever wrote that, and through the database. And you always want to choose the options that is more permanent and more accessible to the public when you have choices. So in this case, we have something that is accessible to the public, so we can cite and reference that. All right, so let's take a look at what that'll look like. So let's first deal with how to cite it, because you can start writing the paper up and putting in author date citations and get to the references later. So let's ask the question, how to cite it? How do you refer to this? Well, we're going to use APA 7's standard author date format. Who wrote it? When was it published? Or in this case, for the citations, the year that it was published. And so we have here Carlson is the last name of the author, and 2020 is the year that was published. So to form a citation, we will have Carlson 2020, and if we're going to be using it as a signal phrase, like Carlson 2020 wrote that, then we'd use the first example. If we're just showing here's where that info came from, we use a second. If we were, say, doing a direct quotation, well, then we would count the paragraphs here because it's a web page and doesn't have page numbers assigned. And so, oh yes, para 3, that indicates the quotation is coming from the 3rd paragraph, counting from the top. So how do we reference that? Well, for anything in APA style, we're starting with a couple types of information. Who wrote it? When was it published? What's it called? And how do I find it? Now, here's an example taken from the APA style blog of a reference entry for a blog entry. And you can see we have Ouellette is the last name. J is the initial for their first name. It was published in 2019. And then we have the month and date, because these are normally included in blog entries. And so just as if you're browsing a newspaper and you're going for a particular edition, and the Sunday such and such a day, such and such a year paper, in this case it is an important identifier, because you might have multiple blog posts from the same day. All right, what's it called? Well, that in this case the title is Physicists Capture First Footage of Quantum Knots Unraveling in Superfluid. How do I find it? Oh, you go to Ars Technica, and here's a link to their website to get to that specific article. And here's a link to a succinct version of the guidelines. You can also find it written up with a little more detail, a little more in the way of examples in the APA style manual, for example, on page 320. But the website gives you all the things you really need to know. So, what should that look like? Well, our 4 elements, we've got Carlson, K. We've got 2020, June 22. We've got culturally competent nursing care in the 21st century. And then how to find it? Oh, Nursing CE website, which there's an archived version here that you can access. Now, you'll note that neither this example here, nor what I'm presenting to you, includes blog in square brackets. That was a requirement in APA 6, but it has been dropped in APA 7th, in part because blogs are much more than a niche thing as they were when APA 6 was developed. They're now often a platform or a type of platform for major authors to be presenting ideas, scholarship, and other things like that. And so APA 7 no longer says, hey, put a note saying, hey, this is a blog, it's not a newspaper, it's mainstream now. So you put them all together, and here's what we end up with. So let's talk a little bit about outlining and drafting, because this is going to be at least 2 pages, and we want to make sure that you are doing the things that the rubric says you should be doing. So I would suggest grabbing a copy of the APA course paper template, and to start with the instructions for this assignment, and go ahead and put in a heading and a bullet point area for each assignment prompt. To add a bullet point area but no heading for the introductions paragraph, because in APA 7 you don't include a heading called introduction, that would be considered redundant. And to also set aside a separate area for a conclusion. Now when you're using our APA course paper template, there's some built-in template styles to help make this look all that it can be, all that you're required to have and you're being graded on have for APA style. And you want to write your headings in title case, so any word with 4 or more letters, capitalize the first word, a bunch of other things, but that'll cover much of it. And then, again, don't put it in an introduction heading. Now, we'll talk about the no tiers plan in a moment, but let's go ahead and take a look at what this would look like. Now, if you load up our course paper template, you'll find that it has some instructions. After you've read those, you can delete them all. Just go to Review and select Delete. Use this little icon here, and you can delete all comments in the document like that. Now, most undergraduate papers don't require an abstract, so you can delete this whole page too. So now you have areas to fill in the title of your paper, your name, etc. Make sure you have the full title exactly as it is up here on this page, and then you'll replace these placeholders here. So if I was to be writing this paper with that reference, well, we've already talked through what that would look like, so let me go ahead and paste that here as well. Now, anytime you paste things, you might lose some formatting, or you might have it formatted other than what you're intending. So it's always a good idea to take a look here. But here I've pasted it in, and that's the same font. This is the spacing we want. Great. That looks good so far. Now let's talk about how to outline this, because we've got some instructions about what should be in this paper. So let's go back to those instructions. So if I paste part of the instructions here, I see that there is a starting thing. Like, if I'm going to critique this article, I should state what it is. And, okay, ID the article. And that could be a sentencing, oh, so-and-so's blog post says blah. So-and-so in a this day, this month, this year article in the New York Times, so-and-so said this, whatever it happens to be. We want to ID the thing that we're discussing. And, big picture, we want to give an outline of the paper. And so list these things in the order that you're going to be discussing them. So I'm going to say, okay, talk about disagreements, my current work experiences, my opinion, now that's just in an opening paragraph. So here, let's look at what would happen in the body. And you can put in headings later. We're just talking about how to go from how this would be laid out. And say, okay, put a brief summary of the article. And then this is one of those key questions that being graded on answering. So let's see. Okay. Now you could go ahead and work this out for other things as well, but let's put in some of those headings first. So our document here has a bunch of built-in styles that if I select the text I want to have that, and I select the style here, in this case APA Level 1, and it gets formatted and bolded and centered. And for a paper this short, we're probably not going to have a ton of different headings, but for dividing these major parts that the rubric says are being graded differently, you can go ahead and make another level 1 heading. This is the highest level heading. And then make this a heading as well. And so now we have a basic idea of how we might structure things. Now, describing your workplace, finding the particular points of agreement or disagreement, it starts with telling the reader, hey, here's what I'm writing about. Perhaps not in those exact words, but here's the major things I'm going to be discussing in the order they're discussing, organizing it so someone looking at this with the rubric would say, oh, yes, they did that, check. Yes, they did that, check. Yes, they did that, check. And so I'm also going to suggest having a conclusion. And here we'll add bullets so just to make it easier to see that those are instructions. And then you can go ahead and fill in things however you see fit. I don't know what you'll be agreeing with. I don't know what you'll be disagreeing with. But you can certainly answer questions like, oh, is this a major agreement? Is this a major disagreement? What should you do with that? And expand on that. The point is to clarify. And when you are referring to the article, make sure it's clear when you're discussing that versus your reading of it or interpretation. Let's talk about what that'll look like. Now, again, we're looking at this piece by Carlson, published in 2020. So we cite that as Carlson 2020. And you might have some language like, there are many points in Carlson 2020 a essay that I agree with. For example, and then you start listing things. And maybe you only have points of agreement, maybe you have some disagreement. Maybe you have something where you're weighing some things that you find are positive for you, but you could see not being something that you think other people would agree with. If so, talk about it. Let us know what that is, how significant is it, what do these things all add up to. And so, pretty soon, you'll have a whole list of things because you're writing about the article, relating things back to it. You might say, for example, Carlson 2020 recommended that, and whatever it is. And then compare and contrast that with your current workplace. However, my current workplace, that could be they don't provide something, they don't do it the way, whatever it is. Tell us about that. But by relating it back to the article, we're not just giving, oh, here are your thoughts on your workplace, but here are your thoughts in relation to what this other author has said are important. All right, let's look back at some extra information in these slides in case that you're looking at, well, how do I develop this argument further? Well, we have our no tiers plan for paragraph writing, which does walk you through several different ways that you can develop your ideas, including starting with a topic sentence that focuses things, gives us evidence to support whatever claim you're making, discusses why that's important, and the evidence could be when you're talking about your workplace, oh, well, this author, Carlson, says to do that. Or Carlson says it's important to be done. Or Carlson says don't do that, as the case may be. And so that will go into the evidence and the analysis, because ultimately you have to make sense of it and decide whether this is something that you are going to recommend or not. So what makes it important to do this, or what makes it important to go against that? To repeat as necessary, synthesize the ideas, tell us, okay, what should be done? And before you know it, you'll have all 2 pages required filled. You might go a little bit longer, that's fine. I wouldn't go, say, 5 pages longer, because if it's supposed to be a minimum 2-page paper, around 500 words, then that's asking for certain conciseness and directness there. That's it for today. You can send us a question at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, sign up for an appointment online, or visit the Online Writing Center website for more information. Have a good night.